you think India can actually do better than just meet targets in this, or there are bigger opportunities for us here?
India can really learn from the transition trajectories of the different nations like United States and Europe and China. You know, what is driving this pathway towards a trajectory towards transition or transformation, as they call it, has a lot to do with impending regulations or penalty. That's one of the drivers, right? I see carbon markets as an essential piece or essential market mechanism that we need to adopt. Generally, it is construed that the moment you have a price, I go to tax the person. No, you need not tax the person, right? I can have a price discovery which can be used for a subsidy. I can have a price discovery which can be utilized for operation support.
Hi, welcome to another edition of Conversations with Saur Energy. Today we have with us a very, very different company from the typical company you see with us. This one is Dastur Energy, and Dastur Energy is quite fascinating actually. This is a US-based firm based in Texas, and they are operating on the energy consultancy space and the intersection of technology, economics and policy. We have with us the CEO of Dastur Energy, Mr. Atanu Mukherjee. Welcome. And we really look forward to this conversation, Atanu.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
How do you feel about the journey from where you are in terms of how India has done vis-a-vis other countries? When we talk about big blocks like India, the US, China and the EU, just in these four blocks, where do you see India's performance right now?
So I think India has done, I would dare say India has done phenomenally well, right? In terms of its journey in the transition space, right, in terms of green energy, and especially so in terms of how it has embarked and advanced in the solar space, right? It's remarkable, right, in terms of the capacity, in terms of its implementation over a period of 8 to 10 years, probably not more than that, right? It's phenomenal. In a similar vein, if you look at it, United States has also done well till now, but the United States is a more, a mix of different energy mechanisms which transition towards, cleaner and greener space. So yes, it has done well in solar, it's done well in wind, it has done, well in carbon capture systems for, industrial systems, and the hard to abate sectors. And I think the United States has been driven significantly by subsidies and mechanisms to support the transition. On the other hand, Europe is very, very focused on complete green transition with lesser focus on the economics of the transition, and that has kind of distorted, the whole path and trajectory a little bit.
Okay.
And therefore, US is very green focused, very focused on obviously renewables, very focused on transition of all forms of fossil fuels and fossil fuel likes into renewable forms of energy, very focused on hydrogen systems, for example, based on renewables. And while that is nice from a virtue signaling perspective, it has got a challenge in terms of its economics and transition viability over a period of time. And so Europe is kind of like in that path. And if you look at China is another area, China does everything, right? It's everything and all. It's not only renewables in terms of wind and sun, but it's also about coal, It's also about nuclear. And I think it's about domination across a vast portfolio at scale, and really dominating the industries and the economy based on a real combination of these different sources of generation for energy, right? So there's a bit of a difference out here in terms of that.
I'm hearing that Europe has paid a significant price for the green transition. In a way, they funded it or they paid a price themselves. China, I think all of us will agree, they have literally profited from it in some ways because they dominate the green manufacturing sector. The US seems to be relatively neutral because they've kept their options open. Where does that leave India? Do you think India can actually do better than just meet targets in this, or there are bigger opportunities for us here?
No, I think there are bigger opportunities for us out here, and I think that India can really learn from the the transition trajectories of the different nations like United States and Europe and China. And I think that it can really be able to shape its energy trajectory based on those learnings, and in the process come out with a much more balanced, right, much more economically attractive, and much more implementation, execution-oriented strategy for energy transformation. I call it transformation rather than transition, right?
Sure.
Into the future, which will be probably the best for all the citizens of India. I think that's one. And I think the other thing that India can learn and also apply is being able to look at market niches, right, where they can develop technologies, at a cost structure and at a capital structure which is much more competitive and effective, and become potentially, exporters of certain technology types, right, around the world. So it has got a lot that it can use from learning. It can be better balanced, right, in terms of its transition trajectory, and therefore it can be much more economically attractive and economically viable for its citizenry in terms of the transition, opening up new pathways and vistas going over time.
Okay.
So that I think is an advantage.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about something like green hydrogen. Could that be an area where India does well, or broadly is green hydrogen just a very long time away in terms of being a viable option?
Right. So I think, green hydrogen is a very attractive proposition per se. But the physics and the economics of green hydrogen based on electrolysis technologies remains daunting and challenging, right? Unless some significant breakthrough happens in the basic physics of electrolysis, which is far out, right? And so, if you look at the technologies for green hydrogen production that are coming into mainstream, from alkaline electrolyzers to PEMs, and now what you call, the other forms of alkaline, which is the anion exchange membranes and such others. Certainly India can innovate. Certainly India can, move in that direction in terms of getting a foothold and niche. But the challenge is that the fundamental physics of green hydrogen, or electrolyzing water to produce hydrogen, remains challenging and daunting. And therefore, that deters, right, the economics to get down to levels which are sustainable, right, for use cases or applications which can be competitive in the markets. So that's a fundamental challenge, right? I mean, it's very unlikely that you will get down below $4 per kg, for example, in green hydrogen. Very, very unlikely, right? With even the lowest power prices. It's very difficult to get down the capital cost of green hydrogen to levels below certain numbers, depending upon the country that you operate. For example, even though people talk about stack costs, coming down to $200, $300, end of the day, what matters is the actual implemented cost of the project, and that is significantly higher compared to the stack costs. So below $1,000 per kilowatt is very difficult. $2,000 in the US, below that is very difficult. So I think these things drives the economics, economic plateau in terms of where it, what you call, stabilizes at. And if that is the case, it's very difficult for it to get it down below a certain vertical point. And if you're at $4 per kg, it's very hard for you to drive what you call production of materials or commodities, right, at competitive prices. Unless there are certain use cases that emerge or certain applications that emerge which allow you to use hydrogen at that price, right, to be able to create something competitive.
With the regime that is there in the US right now, for example, which is not apparently not so obsessed or worried about the green transition, does that give India a little bit more leeway to find their own path? What would you imagine is the right approach for India right now?
Yeah.
Considering that storage costs have come down, so you actually have a case to keep doing it.
The implementation of solar, it's been stellar, right, in India. There's no doubt about it. But solar by itself does not form the electricity system, right? End of the day, you and I consume electricity at a certain cost of retail power, which needs to be affordable, which needs to be non-inflationary, right? And which needs to be reliable 24/7, right? Available to us. And solar or wind, for that matter, which is intermittent in nature, by itself cannot do that. right?
Sure.
It's an important component, right, of the overall electricity mix, but it is not electricity by itself that you or I consume.
Okay.
And so therefore, being able to design or being able to implement a balanced system which complements solar with other forms of generation, right, complements, solar and renewables with the right forms of transmission so that you and I get the same cost of retail,
Sure.
non-inflationary cost of retail power, reliably 24/7. That's a very different problem or solution than just implementing large solar farms, right? And I think that's what we need to focus on. And therefore, things like how do I complement solar with batteries becomes very important. Batteries, the state they are in right now, can certainly do a lot of what you call the complements, but still it's in a certain stage at this point of time in terms of its economics and in terms of its capacities. And batteries have reached a certain level, right, in terms of its maturity, and they've got certain more way to go in terms of the trajectory of economics. So how much you can do with batteries depends on the capacities that can be exploited and the economics that, it'll afford. Other forms of, firming power, as we call it, like, gas-based power, it's expensive out here in India, but you probably may need that. Coal-based power, which is the mainstay, the workhorse today, will be there for a long time, because you need to have coal-based power to complement, right, the other intermittent sources like solar in India, to be able to give you the same thing I talked about in terms of, reliable, non-intermittent, continuous power to you at the least cost. So yes, solar is a big component of the electricity supply system and will continue to be so, but you will have to complement that with storage systems, with other forms of firm generation, flexible generation, so that end of the day, what you get, right, essentially is retail power at the least cost with not necessarily zero carbon, but least carbon.
Sure.
That's the goal that we should have.
Okay. Great that you mentioned that because, just in the last month or actually less than a month, this is a little outside what we've spoken about so far. We've seen almost 3 approvals given in India for different coal plants in, say, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and maybe Jharkhand, some place. And this is almost 4 gigawatts of capacity. This is coming at a time when we're seeing reports jointly done by Indian and even US researchers, maybe University of Berkeley and IACC, which said that post 2030-32, thermal will not be viable, any fresh thermal capacities. Do you have a view on that? Why would authorities, why would the government be encouraging thermal at this stage? Is it because they're not quite sure about the renewables delivering, or is it more like a balancing approach?
Yeah, I think, the statement that thermal is not viable is probably a little out of context, right? End of the day, what we need to be concerned about, or what we need to address is, what is my overall CO2 emission, not what is the source of generation.
Okay.
Whether it is renewable, whether it is coal with carbon capture, whether it is gas, right, with lower CO2, whether it's nuclear, whether it's hydro, the end of the day, how do we abate the CO2? The source really does not matter that much as long as the economics and technology support, right?
Okay.
Reduction of CO2. So from that perspective, I am agnostic to a certain degree in terms of what technologies support generation. It may be thermal, it is solar, it is wind, it is hydro, it is nuclear, right? So in that context, thermal certainly has got high efficiencies. Coal-based thermal, ultra supercritical, advanced ultra supercritical, they are very high efficiencies and they lower what you call the carbon budget. And the key factor of coal is that it is firm generation. Right? It is firm generation, firm controlled generation, which is essential, right, to complement, supplement, and extend renewables. It is not necessarily a replacement or complete replacement of a fossil-based system, right? Or renewables does not completely replace a fossil-based system. So 4 gigawatts or 10 gigawatts or, currently I think 30 gigawatts on implementation plan is essentially a complement to the overall electricity system, which is composed of renewables, which is composed of, nuclear to some degree, which is composed of coal. And so, yes, it will be needed for firming up renewables, tiding over uncertainty and intermittency of renewables. The more renewables you have, the more is the uncertainty you create. Please, this is something that people kind of like tend to discount a little bit, because as you increase renewable penetration, the more will be the volatility. And the more it becomes a part of the power mix, more is the need for you to provide firming resources, which is batteries probably, which is coal-based, what you call based, which is gas-based if you got gas at the right price, at the right economics to hold the price trajectory that you have got, to hold the availability and, an access trajectory that you've got, on a continuous basis. So yes, adding coal is a complementary, right, resource. How much is a question of how much complement it has, how much it helps in balancing the overall energy, what you call generation portfolio to give you continuous power. But the statements like it is an not really. It is, if you look at coal-based, thermal generation technologies, they're pretty efficient. If you want to reduce CO2 and thermal generation of coal-based generation, you certainly can use carbon capture. It increases the cost, right?
Sure.
But it may be necessary in certain cases. It may not be what you call viable in certain cases. So you have to look at this as a combination or a portfolio of, resources.
You're saying you can't rule out thermal as long as it adds to the net efficiency of the overall infrastructure.
Yes, net carbon efficiency, net generation and electrical efficiency of the overall infrastructure.
So you work with a lot of companies, Atanu. Today, between, say, over the last 20 years or so, as a company, are you finding that industries are making their steps towards transitioning simply because it's the right thing to do, or is it because of the economics of it? What dominates even today?
So essentially, what is driving this pathway towards a trajectory towards transition or transformation, as I call it, has a lot to do with impending regulations or penalty. That's one of the drivers, right? Which results in certain activities in terms of transition pathways and investments. Second is the opportunity to really create value through transition. And then this sounds counterintuitive. People think, the moment I do what you call CO2 abatement, I will increase my cost. Not necessarily. Not at all necessary, right? You have gains that you can get which allow you to drive economics better. And that's what people have seen. For example, if you have efficiency gains, you essentially are not only reducing the CO2 or the emissions, but you're also driving the economics of the business in the right direction. Similarly, there are certain technologies like solar, and certainly what you call significant impacts in terms of the economics of operation. And so I think a combination of economics, regulation, and future proofing the company drives the initiatives that the companies are taking going forward in terms of adoption.
Okay, so you spoke about regulations, for example. In the Indian context, of course, we have a national grid, and there are many mechanisms to ensure that prices are brought in a certain way, power is bought in a certain way, merit order dispatch, and there is now SCED, of course. How do you think Indian regulators have kept up with this whole changing ecosystem in terms of a higher share of renewables? Have we done enough, or are there gaps where we could do better?
Yeah, so I think the whole area of market-based systems, right, has got its advantages and its limitations too, as you know, right? Markets can fail at times, but in general, market-based systems work. And our adoption of market-based systems, for example, in the electricity markets is still limited, right? In terms of the overall volumes that work. For example, the MBED, the market-based protocol, electricity dispatch, right? Yeah. Still in its formative stage at this point of time. SCED is a centralized dispatch for coal, which is kind of like, nice that it started in 2019, but that's a starting point. It's more of market-based dispatch. That's important, right? But I think there's a lot of opportunities for improving market-based mechanisms for, let's say, electricity distribution, right? And dispatch. It's a key area. And I think that one may learn from international, one may adopt things and adapt things from international markets. If you look at, US markets, for example, they are fairly well functioning, right? In terms of regulations, in terms of the regulations in the electricity markets through FERC, for example. And
but Aren't the differences between states in the US very, very high in terms of power costs?
Yes, it is high depending upon the markets. How the markets are structured. So, for example, if you go to Texas, Texas is an isolated market.
Okay.
Unlike any other state in the United States, it says no, we are not going to be a part of the Federal Energy Regulation Commission. We are Texas, and so ERCOT, right, which is the grid. It's a local market, and it's an energy only market. It's a very efficient energy only market. But the challenge with that market is that if something happens, like what happened in 2021 with Uri, right,
then you're on your own.
Then you're on your own, and then you can collapse, right? This is the problem. But in general, it works very well. That's what I'm saying. Market failures and market. So ERCOT is market-based, but other states are more or less under FERC, and they have their own independent markets too. But they function pretty well. It's not as well it should be, and there's energy markets, and there are what you call as capacity markets. That concept of capacity markets is not there in India, right? For example, you need to have capacity markets saying that, I will trade energy on the market exchanges, electricity on the market exchanges, but that by itself doesn't solve situations when I have extreme events, which happens in electricity markets, right?
Sure.
Extreme tail events, as we call it. But if we have capacity markets where I say, you know what, I will contract for you a capacity of 100 megawatts on demand. I will not use the capacity, but I will pay you a certain value for maintaining that capacity, and I'll call it on demand.
But isn't that one of the ways the large battery makers are going to survive now as a revenue stream?
Yes, that is one of the ways that they can do that. Right. But generally, I think I'm talking about the markets, how you organize electricity markets. It can be batteries. Batteries is one way of doing support supplying capacity. Generators can be one way of supplying capacity. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for evolution, right? In terms of what we can do and make the markets much more efficient, right? And that'll really drop the price. End of the day, it drives the economics in a more favorable manner for India. And I think that's something that we should adapt, not copy, adapt, right? And evolve for our own, like China has done for its own, right? Evolve for our own and make markets more efficient in conjunction with understandings of when markets can fail and complement that with, right regulatory, measures. And I think that's what we should do.
That just makes me wonder actually, because in India, you must have seen, I'm sure you're familiar, that we seem to find anything in surplus anathema. You want to make exactly how much is needed, be it transportation capacity or highways or roads or whatever. Tell me, and now that it's clear that the developing bloc will not get the kind of financing support they expected over the last few years, and India has been saying that at every forum that, look, you've not delivered on the financing support, so I'm going to do this at my own pace or in my own way. And it's been, solar, for example, has been mostly driven by private sector investments, right? Doesn't that put additional pressure in terms of how quickly you can get there, the route you follow versus, for example, the European way, which was heavily subsidized? So what does a country like India do now?
Yeah, so I think that end of the day, there are aspirational goals that one can pursue and one should pursue. But then there's reality in terms of what you can pursue, right, with respect to aspirational goals. And that what you can pursue is obviously ratcheted by how you set the aspirational goals. But what you can pursue is much more based on pragmatism, on what's possible, right, and what's feasible, and what's the right thing to do for the nation, right? So, for example, if you look at India, right, India is a growing nation, 7.5%, 8%, growth rates. That places enormous demands, right, on energy and material systems for us to grow. And if you consume that kind of energy and material systems at the level that you are in terms of economic development, you certainly have a pathway which has limitations in terms of what you can do from an aspiration perspective and what you should do from a perspective of reality and pragmatism. So the pathways of all these will vary. So what is true for the United States or Europe, will not be true for India, right? Cannot be true for India. Europe, for example, has got combination of things. It's a combination of goals which is driven by economics and the maturity of the nation or the region. And also what I call as virtue signaling and idealism, which has formed due to whatever reasons, which at times overrides pragmatism, right? Okay. So they combine both these things together. Europe has driven everything a lot by subsidies. a lot by, which is the right thing to do, by the way, a lot by the ETS system, the emission trading system, which is a mechanism for price discovery, and then translated that, unfortunately, into just tax-based, what you call, penalties.
Okay.
And that has an impact, right, in terms of how Europe as an economy is going to go forward with, and how effective the climate strategies would be from an implementation perspective, right? And we're seeing that unraveling, right, in terms of how things have adversely, to a large degree, impacted Europe, both from a climate perspective, goal perspective, as well as from economic development and economic growth, economic trajectory perspective. And the United States is more ambivalent, if you look at it. It's more balanced across different areas. And then they have, of late, being a little stepped back a little bit, if you will, in terms of their climate goals. But every country, bottom line, every country has got to have its own pathway based on the trajectory that makes most sense, while keeping the aspirational goals, right, in its what you call front view and rear view mirror. So I think that's how you should.
Tell me, as somebody who's seen the system very close up front, you worked with the government also, of course, as an advisor in so many meetings and policy making steps. Given a choice, if you had to subsidize something today, what would that be?
I would consider two things that are important, right? I think solar has pretty much, reached a point where it has got sufficient critical mass and market momentum and the economics and scale of operation, which doesn't really require subsidies, I think.
Okay.
That's what I think.
That's good to hear.
It's probably on its own, pretty much. Right? I think the subsidies that you may require to, egg things forwards are three, in my opinion, right? One is certainly what you call storage systems.
Okay.
And when I say storage systems, it's not just battery storage, but also pumped hydro, for example. We need to, what you call, make that happen. There's trajectory out there which can close the delta faster, okay? Not much as like in other solar system it was 10 years back, but still there's a delta which can be closed, and that brings down the cost of levelized cost of storage, as we call it, right? So that's one thing that we do.
Okay.
Second thing I would do is on transmission systems. Right.
Great.
Because this is an area which
that's been causing a lot of delays also.
It's been causing a lot of challenges, right, for the past many, many years. And I think we have to do that. We have got to get the transmission systems right. I'm not saying that we should subsidize everything, no, but there are clear corridors which may need to have support from subsidy to get it to the next level in terms of its implementation. HVDC corridors, for example, is required, right?
Okay.
I think how you design the transmission systems, right, and accelerate the process, because if there's a lag between transmission and implementation, which is the case with solar implementation, you always have this problem. Rajasthan producing so much of what you call solar, which you cannot move out, right? As its power cost is negative. You don't want to have the situations, right? So you want to have the transmission systems, you want the storage systems as the complements. And third thing, I think for the industrial systems, we have to have a program which we suggested, right, in 2022, for the carbon capture and storage, right? Because you want to be able to support carbon capture, because you cannot electrify steel making, you cannot electrify, cement making, you cannot electrify
beyond the point
refinery, you cannot refine crude processing. You can't do that. That's many, many, many decades out, if at all. And so you have to have carbon abatement from that and energy transformation in that area too. And the way to do that essentially is to, one of the ways which is most applicable at a large scale, commercial scale, is carbon capture, utilization and storage.
We've heard a lot of conflicting views on carbon capture and storage in terms of the progress they've made or the establishment of carbon markets. Where, again, I'm assuming you're much closer to that. Where are we there? Are we really close in terms of carbon capture being a viable mechanism for these industries?
Yeah, so I think unlike, I just try to call out the myth and the reality to the extent that I can, objectively, is the fact that, capture systems have been there for many, many decades. If you look at it, right, carbon capture systems have been there since 1950s. For what? For basically producing oil, So if you look at the United States today, it injects about 50 to 70 million tons of carbon dioxide per annum inside the ground. To do what? To produce oil, which produces oil from depleted oil fields. And it's very effective in terms of its cost structures if the price is right, and you make good margins. So it's been there for a long time at very large scale. So it's nothing new, unlike what is made out to be unfortunately, by the media at times. Sure. And a lot of constituents have got different ideals and interests, right? And some people have, oh, it's only renewables, or somebody have only, no, it's not only, it's about a combination of these things. So to your point, no, it certainly what you call works at scale. It certainly has not received the kind of funding attention that solar, wind have received in the past 10 years. And so therefore it lags behind in terms of implementation and execution into the actual industrial landscape, which needs to get that fillip. It has to have that fillip to what you call adopt. Any kind of these technologies which needs large scale adoption will require some kind of support, which has been lacking across the world, not only here, across the world. So if you do that, you will take this forward. And that's the only solution that we have for industrial decarbonization in hard-to-abate sectors, which we must agree, right? So that's about the carbon nature of carbon capture. Now the question, you asked about carbon markets, which is a little different from carbon capture. I see carbon markets as an essential piece or essential market mechanism that we need to adopt around the world, and India, of course, too, from a perspective of price discovery. Right? Okay. Discovering the price of a commodity like carbon dioxide is very important, right? Today it is, I call looking out of the window concept. You look out the window and say, I should get this much of subsidy for carbon. Based on what? So discovering the price allows you to allocate capital and allocate costs in the most efficient manner, right? So price discovery is an important piece which we need to determine through carbon markets. Unfortunately, people combine price discovery with price penalty. So generally it is construed that the moment you have a price, I go to tax the person. No, you need not tax the person, right? I can have a price discovery which can use for a subsidy. I can have a price discovery which can be utilized for operation support. I can have a price discovery to use for investments in the present with corresponding returns in the future. And I can use price discovery for imposing a tax. Sure. If the need so be. So the context varies from nation to nation, country to country, region to region. Unfortunately, people have combined carbon markets with tax. That's not true. Discovery of price is a fundamentally important thing, right? In the context of markets of commodities, carbon being one more commodity. So we must do carbon markets. We must decouple discovery of price through carbon markets from its execution or implementation through either a tax or subsidy or investment or a hybrid mechanism that you may merge. Every country has got different mechanisms that one can do. And I think that, therefore, carbon market is an important piece. Anything in this carbon capture, discovery of price for establishing how much funding you need to give for carbon or how much tax for that matter you need to put on carbon, if that needs to be for carbon capture. And
is there a broad indicative price range at which you think it helps to make a lot of other technologies like carbon capture storage more viable?
You're saying the carbon price?
Right.
Yeah, so I think if you look at it, depends totally on the way you discover the price, right? So for example, if you have a trajectory of carbon reduction over a period of time, you put quotas or caps, right? And those caps progressively, what you call, increase over time. Right. And the price trajectory, what you call, progressively changes over time, so that the society or the economy can adapt over time. In Europe, which is the closest that you have got in terms of a market-based system for price discovery, is the ETS. Right. ETS trades at 100 euros, 90 to 100 euros per what you call ton, which is on the higher side based on the caps and the trajectory that they got. If the cap and trajectory is reduced, that may go down, right, to whatever is sustainable for the economy. I think in the Indian context, probably about the starting point of $30, $40, $50 is
that's a lot actually.
Yeah, $30 is probably about right. At the same time, you don't want a situation where you design the system which leads to market failures in terms of discovery, right? Okay. Which happened as you might know, in the earlier phases of this trading certificates for efficiency, and the whole thing failed, right? In terms of, I would say failed, but it didn't get that kind of traction in terms of the price discovery process, led to $5, $10 or something of that sort per ton of CO2, which is not exactly reflective of any substantial, what you call, incentive or mechanism that can be implied based on that price. So you got to have a price discovery mechanism shaped by what you call a cap and trade, if you were to do that, which is reasonable, right? Which is reasonably, implementable and impactable. It cannot be, I think, the European price of 100 euros. It cannot be, I think, $5, but it probably can be $30, and so that it's got a reasonable chance in terms of, taking it forward in terms of mechanisms of instruments which drives its implementation. So yes, carbon markets I think is very important, right? In terms of understanding what the price is going to be in the context of the environment and the ecosystem, and how it can be implemented, right? In terms of either a mechanism of incentives or credits or taxes, if that's the case. And I would defer to say that in the context of India, it should not be taxes.
Okay.
It should not be taxes. It is not socially expedient. It's not economically expedient, right? It's not politically expedient at this point of time, right?
Sure.
Europe is much more politically aligned, socially aligned towards taxes, and it's been there in the making for 20 years. Same thing in the United States. The United States doesn't talk about carbon markets because they couple the carbon markets with taxes. And so it's been going. So I think that's the bottom line. Carbon markets, yes, for price discovery, applied towards different ways of implementation, which may be carbon capture, which may be, for that matter, renewable subsidies, if that's the case, in certain new forms of renewables. It may be for the battery vertical capacity markets. There are different ways of doing that, right? But markets is important, I think.
We'll thank you. Thanks a lot for your time. This has been indeed a pleasure.
Thank you. Absolutely.